if all the puzzle pieces matter when designing your legacy. I'd like to welcome back Laura and Riccardo Gambineri. They are with Trusted Governance out of Switzerland, and we welcome them back today to chat more about the topics of governance, succession, and a variety of other conversation points. So welcome back this lovely morning.
Thank you, Angelina, for having us again.
It is my pleasure. Yes, and it's good to see you also, Riccardo. I know that it's evening time, I believe, in Switzerland.
Correct. Yes, we're almost at 6 p.m. So quite a bit of a time zone difference here, but we're still glad to be here.
Wonderful. So even though about 2/3 of today's affluent are self-made, I know the two of you work with a number of families that have multi-generational wealth. So let's start with this topic of governance. What is it?
I think that's a very good question. And I think it's probably something that different people answer a little bit differently depending on who you ask. Essentially, though, I would say that family governance refers to the set of structures, the processes, the policies and mechanisms that a family establishes to guide and manage its affairs and relationships. So really, it is about creating mechanisms or frameworks that aid in decision-making, wealth management, and conflict resolution, and aid in the family in the passing down of values and traditions across generations within a family. I think there's different strategies that can be used or mechanisms put in place to build trust and communication within this family, which essentially is a key component to family governance. And I would also say that family governance is a proactive approach to managing unique challenges that can arise within the families, especially wealthy or business owning families.
Riccardo?
I mean, adding to what Laura said, we really believe that family governance is about or aims to promote unity, transparency, long-term sustainability within the family, to foster, create commitment among family members. And question of the strategies, I guess we're often asked, what is the best strategy? Is there the one strategy? How to build trust? There's no really one strategy in place. There are different strategies, and they are very unique to the family. Every family is unique, and it depends on the geography, on the cultural context, the religious influences, all kinds of things. Depends on the individual needs and desires of the family members. But what it's really about is to establish a communication across the generations and to the next generation, embed them. And what is very important that family gatherings are established to facilitate discussions, to share information, that they spend time together to really figure out what are the joint common values, what makes it the family, and that should be done also regularly. And important is to commit everybody to putting in an agenda that this is really regularly done to build trust, and have also an open communication is very important.
Yes. Well, I find this a topic so interesting because we've looked at the statistics and the numbers. We know that about 60% of whether a family succeeds, whether it's legacy planning or succession or multi-generational wealth stewardship, has to do with trust and communication. So this is like the human-centric piece that a lot of times people don't invest enough thought capital into, and thought leadership, their time, their even just having a metric for it, a key performance indicator. And I just love, I'm going to read it for a moment. Your website has, I think, 4 PDFs that Laura shared. And one of the PDFs talks about defining family governance. And if it's all right, I'd like to read it for any of the listeners out there. I think it's just a great reference point. And again, I think it's on your company's website. It reads, defining family governance can be made tremendously complicated or very straightforward. In its simplest form, family governance is a mechanism that eases joint decision-making on a family level to avoid future conflicts. With the aid of advisors, families learn techniques, write policies, and can implement processes that aid the whole family in decision making. Topics in need of these mechanisms are often those that are emotional, habitual, create confusion, or conflict. So I know your origin or your roots is really in the insurance business, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But I think that the two of you came to a place where your client said, hey, there's a kind of a pink elephant in the room, or there's a void and no one's looking at this. And yet it would be very value-based if we could start talking about it.
Yeah, I just had this conversation recently. It's, I mean, we'll get to that later, but very often you get to very uncomfortable topics with life insurance, and also with family governance. You ask questions that are not so comfortable, that include, passing of someone. It's not just we're talking about the next generation, but we're talking about someone letting go and someone passing away. So these are things that need to be talked about, and they're very comfortable sometimes, but extremely important. So
yes.
I agree.
Yes. Well, if death's not, if the topic of death is not uncomfortable enough, let's throw money and power and family dynamics into it.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Okay. So thank you for providing the basis, because there's a number of families again today that are coming into wealth, and whether they're making their money through cryptocurrencies or online commerce, or just a number of new avenues for revenue, they might not even have a reference point to understand the value of setting up a governance structure, or even what a family constitution is. And so I think that sharing this knowledge and giving more away than maybe some people normally do is a great idea, because someone's got to start somewhere, and being transparent. And I'm not suggesting that it's a DIY conversation, do it yourself, but I think transparency is very important. So as a family grows, some of the strategies that can be put in place sooner than later, as well as to revisit often, can be assemblies or constitutions. What else have the two of you come across that work in the real world? Riccardo or Laura?
Riccardo, do you want to have a try?
Yeah, I'm coming back to your point, the family constitution, and what you just said before. The interesting thing is we meet a lot of families that work well together, that plan, let's say, estate plans, wealth transfer plans from a tax point of view. That's why we often also come in from the insurance point and tax questions. And then we figure out nobody has really, and that's to the point, thought about, so what really happens if the one or the other key family member is just gone tomorrow, right? And then there comes a question, what is really all about families, our values? And then we come to the discussion that family constitution, governance structure is needed. And the family constitution, certainly families are larger, is something we believe is really needed, is formalizing, documenting the values, the governance structure, the decision-making processes, so that everybody knows and has a guide what to follow, what to do when those things happen. And that's often not existing, even though they have a nice technical structure, but the human element, and this is all about really, is about the human part of it, right? You document how you want to live together, how you actually live together, or also document what you don't want to do together. Or maybe you want to expand on that.
Yeah. Well, in your opinion, Riccardo, what works well in a family constitution? Because a lot of times individuals can have advisors and attorneys write a well-crafted document. And then when it comes to the family members playing nice every week, that's a whole other story. So what have you come across that works well or is important to include in a family constitution, or even a family meeting from a verbal conversation accountability perspective?
Yeah, I think I'm going to jump your question quickly.
Okay.
So I think it's a good question, because family constitutions are extremely unique, as they are all tailored and made for the individual families, right? So there's no standard form. There's no, I'm going to Google it, here's a family constitution, I can replicate it for all of my clients. Yet I do think that, or I do think that there's certainly elements that should be considered, and more often than not are found in family agreements. So like Riccardo said, I think a family constitution is a very formal document. It outlines the governance structures, the rules, the principles, that guide the interactions and decisions of a family, especially in the context of managing the family wealth, but also the businesses and the family itself in a sense. And I think some key elements that are very often included are, for one, clearly articulating the mission of the family, the vision, the core values, to provide that foundation for the decision making. Because in the end, it aids the future generations to understand the family's purpose, the principles, where they come from. I think the ownership structure should be defined and outlined. This includes different roles or responsibilities of family members. We have certain decision-making mechanisms. If they are already in the family, I think they should be in there.
So managing expectations.
Very much so. Yeah, absolutely. Then when it comes to succession planning, you may want to have guidelines for this process of transitioning from one generation to the next. I think if something is clearly defined, it's not going to be a surprise. So certain rules may be in it, ownership structures, estate planning aids. Then you can, what we see a lot is families outlining, I guess, plans for the education. So for children or the next generation, really understanding the business, but also education in general. A lot of families include communication policies to encourage a certain openness and honesty within the family.
Which is great for culture.
Exactly. Yeah. Wealth preservation strategies, I think, is another one. So really getting down to the investment policies, the risk management mechanism for adapting for unforeseen events, because in the end, it's still managing a lot of wealth, and with wealth come investment decisions.
And pressure, like don't mess that up. Next gen family member, rising gen family member, yeah.
Sure, 100%. And then, of course, there's philanthropy. I think that's a very big one. We've seen that come up more and more, where certain guidelines or goals may be defined in these governance structures, in these constitutions. And like I said, these constitutions are very much unique to families. And I think it's important that they provide clarity, and that they aid in mitigating conflicts, reinforce shared values, facilitate smooth transitions between the generations. And I think one blind spot, as you said, that is very often overseen is the need for change. So,
ooh, yeah,
exactly. So something unforeseen can always come up, and I think being flexible and adaptable is the most important thing nowadays. So that also goes for the language within the family constitution. I think it should be very comprehensive. It should be very forward thinking, but really it needs to be adaptable. And one should acknowledge that the family constitution is still a living document. So you don't write it once and then you put it away, but you should include provisions for periodic reviews to update it and to make sure that it's always relevant and really up to date.
Yeah, and if I may add, the well-functioning family business, family with one or multiple business or just a large complex family that functions well, carries the risk that just because everybody feels comfortable, nobody's thinking about why it is the case. Everything is somehow organized, whether the mom is the person that always ensures that everybody comes together or that emotional things are taken care of. It's a bit like, I sometimes say, it's a bit like, the difference between an employee and an entrepreneur. Somebody who's employed in a company does his job, somehow well defined, and just doesn't realize and appreciate all the things that are organized in the background by the company, from the HR department, the tax, these things, corporate filings, reportings, compliance issues. The person just does a job, and there's a whole cloud behind doing other things, and the company only works because everything is done. And sometimes people that become an entrepreneur, they're shocked of all the things they need to take care about. And it's a bit in the same in the family. When everything works smoothly, the biggest risk is really, the biggest blind spot is not thinking about why everything works well. And that's one of the elements where we want to bring this together and then document and formalize so that they understand the whole system and why it works and what needs to be done that it will work in the future too.
Yes, yes, the harmony behind all of it to make the symphony work. Yeah, I just was thinking about something the other day about how in the United States, we dedicate at least one day a year to taxes. So there's an expression about like, oh, there's always death in taxes, right? And yet we're held accountable to taxes, whether it's quarterly or annually, to sit down with a CPA or a bookkeeper, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, when do we set aside a day to think about our holistic legacy and all of the reasons why something works? Like like in other words, where's the bookkeeping when it comes to emotional governance or the emotional quotient of why that harmony has all of the moving pieces work, from the shared values to the vision to the mission. And yet, if we were to dedicate even one day a year, we would be so much better off. And I think this is where the accountability of advisors and great coaches and consultants can be a champion in this area, because the IRS definitely motivates based on fear, but a legacy can be something that's motivated by foresight or even depth of character. So what are, speaking of wealth preservation for a moment and wealth stewardship, what are some of the beliefs and behaviors needed? Because a lot of times the founding generation or the senior generation can be so busy working 50 or 60 hours a week, and they are not even with. Your scenario is different because, Laura, you get to work with your dad, which is amazing. But there are some next gens that can, find themselves where inheritance can be something that's shocking and a surprise. So what are some of the beliefs and behaviors that are needed when it comes to wealth stewardship?
As we start, so again, I think for wealth preservation, it clearly does not only involve financial strategies. And unfortunately, most of the advisors running around, and a lot of them do a great job, but they limit their work on the financial side. But the set of beliefs and behaviors, as said before, that contribute to the long-term sustainability of the family wealth are really essential. So when it comes to belief, I would argue that there are several ones. There's really the stewardship mentality, the family seeing themselves as a steward of the wealth, being responsible for preserving and growing it for future generations. Long-term perspective, another one, preservation of wealth requires a focus on the long-term and sustainable practices. So, I mean, like in other parts of life or businesses, long-term really works only if it's sustainable. A one-off exercise is not sufficient. Aligning the values is really key, and that's what keeps people together, whether in spouses, a family, or even in a company. Really believing in aligning investment decisions and wealth management practices with the family's core values. If that's not aligned, for example, if people believe in, if the family members believe in philanthropy or in sustainable investment, ESG things, and the investments are completely going in the other direction, this will not work. And adaptability.
That will create conflict.
As Laura mentioned, I mean, really everybody's acknowledged that the landscape changes, and having the willingness to adopt investment strategies, business practices, but also how the family may interact or how governance and decisions are made. And we change as well, right? With increasing age and experience. Today, I think differently about things compared to 20 years ago. And educational liberation. We are both, Laura and I, certainly our families believe in lifelong learning, and the value of education financially, but also generally is really an important tool to empower family members to make informed decisions. And education is a very wide field, and we could have a completely separate session about that. But we see in families a lot spent, for example, identify one of the kids' siblings to become the future financial CFO. And then they miss that there maybe needed also educational components in social competence, in leadership, in how to manage relationships, and so education is a huge point.
Yes, and I'm almost hearing humility more than entitlement also as an undercurrent.
Yeah. And again, we always come back to family because it's always about families. Very often, I mean, we also have, of course, clients that are still self-made young individuals, not even in a relationship, but also themselves are part of a family, they are a child, and one day they will form a family of whatever kind. But the communication is extremely important in collaborative decision-making, involving families actively pursuing diversification and learning a disciplined approach to spending and avoiding excessive lifestyle inflation. That what we also often see is, I mean, that's again a matter of education, values, but at the end, everything has to be brought in balance also, especially when you have a long-term vision, the whole financial planning. I mean, you cannot spend more than I earn or I'm entitled to. So really finding a balance. And as mentioned, the act of encouraging ongoing education, seeking advice from professionals is very important. Sometimes we meet persons that they are Googling experts and think they can solve a lot of problems by just researching from their own medical health situation to other things. But as more complex it becomes, you need professional advisors, proactively engaging estate planning, integrating philanthropy, regularly reviewing and reassessing the family's financial plan and strategies are all behaviors needed for wealth preservation. So continuous monitoring also is really important. And I think Laura would agree. I would say that all the families that we deal with regularly are ones that are seeking to impact positively, not only today, but for generations to come. They're looking to preserve wealth. So I would not be able to point to one success story, but rather that these points are most likely essential if your goal is preserving wealth. Research indicates also that the most successful families preserve their wealth by focusing on the human capital as much as they focus on the financial capital. There's really great research material about. We always come back to the human part. Human capital is important, and that includes, again, education and other elements.
Sure. And before Laura chimes in with any thoughts, I think that when you are referring to education, it's also shining a light on how that success is earned, because from year to year, it can change, from decade to decade or generation to generation, it can change. So even if a NextGen or a Rising Gen member has traditional education, there's also something about covering all those blind spots of I don't want to call it necessarily boots on the ground, but it's being able to walk the floor with another entrepreneur to know what it's really like, because a lot of the times the ones that are so successful in their industry, they really are giving 50 or 60 hours to have their finger on the pulse, to be a little bit ahead of their competitors, or to be that much more diligent in getting the results. And I think that there's when you talk about that education piece and also just not overspending, I think it's understanding how is that success earned. Because sometimes it's earned very easy, and other times it's those other seasons come, and there's going to be a little bit more sweat equity. Laura, do you have any other thoughts you'd like to add to your dad's answer?
No, I think Riccardo answered it really well. I think basically what he said, it's a combination of the mindset, of the communication, and the actions. So you need to have all three of them, and that really leads to an effective wealth preservation in the end. So it's not just one topic, but it's again, it's that holistic view.
Yes, yes, of all those puzzle pieces. And I just want to emphasize again, it's the courage to have the conversations, whether it's on a weekly basis or for the leadership to set time aside, that it's just as important as running all of their other meetings. Okay, lovely. So what are some of the good ideas that you have seen emerging from the next gen or even the senior generation? Because I think that all good ideas can come forward at the table. It's not just necessarily the young ones coming up. I think it's also the individuals that have, TI or what they call time in. So what what are some of the good ideas that you've seen, whether it's in the last couple of years or in the span of your career, that can make a legacy last or that can contribute to the foundation being built?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's several positive trends and ideas emerging, both from the next gen as well as from the senior generations who are motivated to be good stewards. And very often these ideas reflect the desire for sustainability, for innovation, and for a really broader impact. So I'm going to speak for Riccardo and I. Riccardo, do chime in if you have something else. But I think from the next gen, what we really see is very much, or what we see aligned in our perception, is that for one, it's important for them to be aligned on the investments with the social and environmental impacts. So really social impact investing, I think, is a top one for them.
So
Very
I'm sorry to interrupt. So it's almost like I'm hearing, so if everyone can understand one another at the table and not say, oh my goodness, like Laura has an interest in the forest and not condemning or not, not having like narcissistic tendencies come up in family council meetings or, so I'm just echoing that in real life, it could be, yes, a next gen member can have a different idea of where they'd like to allocate the funds and not to be mocked for it.
Exactly. I think being very open about it. I think it's definitely one. I think another one is that the next gen very often brings a fresh perspective on certain subjects such as technology or innovation. They very often want to include these kind of things. They want to invest in tech startups and whatnot. I also feel like there's a growing emphasis on transparency and inclusivity, as you just said, right? So the next gen family members really seek that open communication at the table, like what you basically said. And nowadays, I think talking about wealth matters is a much more open subject as it used to. At least that's what I feel. And probably diversification. So really recognizing the importance of it, ensuring that resilience of the family wealth over time so that it does grow and stay. Whereas from the senior generation, and we do see very, obviously they all have similar patterns, but if we look at the senior generation, what we see of importance to them is, I think, for one, it's legacy planning. Going down. So they go beyond the financial aspect, but they really are interested in preserving and passing down certain family traditions that they have, certain values, cultural heritage, and seeing as a holistic view again. They also recognize the value of experience. So you very often see them actively engaging in mentorship programs, talking about how transferring knowledge or how to transfer their knowledge to the next generation and how to prepare them for what's to come. They also are very into, I would say, philanthropy and social responsibility, even though we do see that coming with the next gen more and more as well. But it's definitely very high on the list for senior generations. And ESG, so environmental, social, and governance, bringing them more into the investment decisions, and I think generally wanting to work with the next generation and not being isolated. So,
yeah, if I may add, I think
sure.
Just the ESG, the whole topic, which can be nicely well integrated in a strategic philanthropy program. What we see often nowadays as a concern of the senior generation and a pressure point which is isolating on the younger ones is the burden of wealth, the negative view on wealth And combining philanthropy, ESG in this topic helps also the next gens to that wealth can be something positive, that you can have an impact, can do something good. So that can help. And that's also, again, values-based, to align values between the generations and within the family. But it can help really bridge that.
Which is
And
great
makes
when
it,
it comes to perceptions. Keep going, please.
yes. Yeah, and these perceptions, and it's really a hard topic for the next gens. When you read the press in these days, about capitalism, the rich people, and capitalism is bad. Not necessarily. There are a lot of wealthy families that really do good, and this is a key element, and it helps the next gens to really make that linkage, how you can do good with the wealth and equally still making money with it. I mean, it's great to be a philanthropist, but it doesn't help if you run out of money in a few years later. So you have to combine that, and you can combine that. Sorry, Laura, just want to add that one.
No, it's a good point, I think, because you said a lot of people see money as burden, and I think maybe that's a trend as well for the next gen. You see these trends. There's one in Germany, it has a certain title to it, but a trend where the next generations, a lot of them, or a few of them that are now receiving a huge wealth from their parents, they just want to give everything away. Give everything, say you should pay 100% taxes, we should give everything away. I don't want all of this because it's negative. And I think, it has good and bad. Obviously, I think it's great if you want to give it away and say, I don't need this money. But sometimes I wonder, do they think beyond themselves and maybe for generations to come? Because you could do good without giving everything away immediately. You can do that over, a very long time. So there's different techniques, but it's something that we see. And that's coming up more and more all over the place. But,
Yes. So I think one of the things you're speaking into is what if that next gen feels isolated, whether they're reading articles in the newspaper or the media about the success of their family, and other young people say whatever at school, and or even as a young adult. I mean, I just am aware, like with inflation, somebody could have that inheritance passed to them and then easily get very nice housing, whereas someone who doesn't have an inheritance but still has a college degree and they work at, let's say, a public company, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 company, and then there is that's whether it's the impact on their mental health or wanting to socially fit in and not be isolated. As what are you thinking, Riccardo, right now, with that look on your face?
It's
a
we come
very
back to the communication, right? It's really
education.
and what comes with it.
Yes, but the biggest thing is, or creates the biggest disasters, when there's a lack of communication, when there's a lack of understanding. And the lack of understanding typically comes without having an open discussion, what is really concerning. I mean, the younger should be open and concerned about what is concerning the seniors, and vice versa. I mean, what we have seen sometimes, family situations where parents think, oh, what is the problem? They should be happy, we're wealthy, they have what they need. And they never ask them whether they really feel well in those shoes, right? So,
well, and I think there's another point before I move on to the next question. Something to think about even regarding leadership. What happens if that individual doesn't want to be a leader? Because to design a legacy requires some level of personal initiative as a self-starter and their one's personal development, to want to say, you know what, I've been endowed with this great gift and I could do great things with it. But with that comes a certain level of responsibility. They have to want to care to put together something, or to be a part of a team that wants to do something. And if they really just want to fit in with their friends, then all of a sudden this idea of stewarding their wealth could be
oh, you're right, Angelina. I think and we see differences. I guess we come to it also quickly. There's a difference whether there's just wealth, financial wealth, or whether there is wealth in the form of family businesses, where the responsibility is certainly a different one, where you also take care about all the employees and everything that's behind the business. So there's also, I mean, the burden of wealth at the end can be equally but I think it's even more complex when when you try to pass on operating businesses to the next generation.
Yeah,
Sure.
and it gets back to education, and really asking the question how people perceive wealth. Like if I ask you, how do you define wealth? What is wealth to you? Some people may say it's to pay my bills. Others may say it's for vacation. So whatever the values that they perceive and put together or put on the same line, I guess, on the same level as wealth, from there on, you can really start moving forward. It may just be to pay bills for some people, and to have an easy lifestyle, to not have to worry about feeding the kids at the end of the month. And for others, it's really about, giving back and charity and philanthropy. And for other people, it's buying the third Ferrari. Whatever it is, but wealth has a different definition for everyone. And I think it makes sense to define that and look into that. And if you start from a young age giving these values and that education, I think that there's less of a surprise later on to not have these perspectives, those negative perspectives or feelings of inheritance.
Sure. Because I think with it comes a certain level of responsibility. And if the individual can reconcile it, like you had mentioned about the purpose with the family business, then that's wonderful. The values are aligned, and then it's that's where that individual can focus their energy compared to, oh my goodness, this is too much for me. Like you had said, in Germany, if there's a trend of individuals just giving it away. Okay, so let me move on to the next question. And this comes from one of the PDFs of your company literature. You wrote, in many family businesses, there's an emotional connection to the business that goes past the sheer monetary relationship. And I wondered if you would talk about any real life examples where whether you worked with the family or if you didn't, or if you would like to omit the names, no worries, where they were able to successfully transfer their values, vision, and mission across generations. I know Switzerland has some amazing watch companies, maybe some amazing chocolate companies as well. But I think when somebody looks at the statistics, it's again, maybe about 20 or 30% being optimistic of the families that put the time in to see the results. So I wondered if there's any families or stories that inspire you when you come into work each day, or.
Yeah, yeah, certainly several family-owned businesses that have successfully identified and transferred their values, vision, mission across generations. We also work with some, obviously, and we can't disclose the names, but it's really about surpassing just the monetary aspects. And as mentioned before, especially when companies are involved, and there are famous companies, large ones that are globally known, well-known brands, whether you go to arts and fashion in Italy, or you have other companies that help fitting your home, like IKEA. Some integrate philanthropy strategically into their legacy, especially when businesses are sold to engage and give something meaningful to the family long term, or to keep business alive. Sometimes the tax environment, the tax rules and succession rules of certain countries also play a role. For example, in some countries, like in Europe, often civil law countries, you have forced heirship rules. You don't have testamentary freedom, so family members get their defined share. Then you have different inheritance or death taxes, depending on the country, that play also a big role. But at the end, it comes back to really values and education. And if you take IKEA, obviously most people know IKEA, the famous blue factory, with the yellow letters. Really a business, family-owned business founded by a man, Ingvar Kamprad. And he started his business at the age of 17, selling just household goods. And today it's really a global brand, multi-billions. He passed away not so long time ago. But it's still kept in the family. Obviously, they have a lot of structuring around it as well. But design in a way within the family and with the structure that it will sustain and kept alive. In the US, very well known, or probably the biggest family business is Walmart.
Sure, the Waltons.
Yeah.
Yes.
They rooted in the founder's commitment to the customer first philosophy. That was a success, and that's still very much on top of what they do. It's in the center.
Sorry, keep going.
Time to wake up.
It's remind me of the 9:30 podcast with the two of you, separate from daylight savings time. Sorry about that. Keep going on about the Waltons.
No problem.
Oh, I think that's these are very well-known, self-explaining examples that it is possible to build a legacy, and what is needed is really having defined the core values and the philosophy for the business, and then the family needs to be aligned with that, right? And to carry that forward. If that's not understood, then obviously a business model would change, behavior would change, and then you would also not be able to maintain the business, the successful business model. That's why everybody really needs to be embedded in that thinking.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, before Laura chimes in, I'd love to be a fly on the wall to any of the family meetings for the Waltons, because I'm sure they have faced their setbacks and challenges throughout the years, even though they offer a great product, a great business model that is customer centric. It would be very interesting to know how they grew from a personal capacity to because I'm sure some individuals they say, oh my goodness, I'm born into this, and again having to reconcile that and find one's place. I know there was a documentary about the Johnson and Johnson family, and the son was given some advice to do some type of work so that he would have purpose when he woke up, because to not have purpose, his own family advised him that's not a very good idea, that there has to be reasons for why you wake up in the morning, whether it's art or something. So yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts, Laura?
When you just said fly on the wall, I would love to be a fly on the wall of the Kardashians. Hate them or love them, but the family has built. It's a business. The Kardashians is a brand.
They're a business.
It's huge, and people love them, they hate them, but what they've made, they've built a huge legacy, and I've tuned into some of their
keeping up.
What's it called?
Keeping up with the Kardashians.
And there's one thing that I've always noticed is that the family governance is on point. And if there's one person I could sit down with, it would be Kris Jenner, because I think the way that she handles and manages that family is absolutely, she knows exactly what she's doing, and she knows exactly how things are perceived on TV and what brings the media and what brings the money in. So I think she does that extremely well. But generally, I think my first thought when Riccardo was talking was the Estee Lauder family. I think that's how you call it.
Estee Lauder?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
The beauty, which is extremely global, but it's also family owned. And from what I've read about them is that their values are likewise, going towards the customer satisfaction, similar like Walmart. But it also includes quality and innovation and always keeping up with the trends, organic, not having animal testings, no toxins. So they're evolving that beauty brand all of the time. And there's multiple family members that continue to hold key leadership positions until today. And they try to keep that in the family. So I think that's also one very successful family. And because you were asking for Switzerland or Swiss examples, the Swatch, the watch group is also family owned. And I think they're also doing extremely well. They're really trying, to get the best quality, to get great designs. They're partnering up with different other luxury brands, but still keeping it possible to buy it for people that may not be as wealthy, make it affordable, but still have the Swiss quality. So I think that's also a very known brand that's very, very well managed so far.
Yes, Yes, I'd
We
be
never,
curious. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, we never, because then, like, I think the outside of some of these families, they always, it looks very good, but whether this is the case behind closed doors, I think that's where the point comes in again. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for some of these families and see how it really goes down, and the decision making, and whether
No,
everyone's
I
talking
think
nice at the supper table or people are throwing shoes at each other, or
no, you're right. What we see, obviously, in the first generation, wealth generation, that's usually, and you just mentioned one example, or I mean, you either have a matriarch or patriarch just being the governance and setting, the
The
rules,
standard,
the standards,
the culture.
and really, then you have, and as we said before, you have to establish the governance model, the family constitution, all those things. Once these initial leaders, leadership person, male or female, is gone, the governance has to be followed as restrictive going forward. It's just transposed into a rule, like laws. There has to be some policing function, but
Accountability.
it would not work if it just, if it's not followed. And that's the whole purpose. At the very beginning, typically you have really some strong personalities ensuring that things go in whatever direction. And usually the right direction, that's because they are successful. Uh, and our job is helping those at the beginning to add these missing pieces that this can continue as a legacy after their passing. That's about the whole discussion, right? But that's
why,
really the
well,
governance model need to be followed after. And I mean, why I'm saying this, because it doesn't mean that it's always nice and a pleasure, to follow rules uh, in such a framework. Doesn't mean that always everybody is happy, right? I mean, there's a lot of additional professionals that then try to solve these other issues, coaching and mental health, physical health, all these kind of things. But at the end, it's really about establishing something that is followed. And I mean, everybody knows these royal families, right? And the stories about why they function, because people have to follow strict protocols. They cannot necessarily do what they want. So there's a
Take.
give and take and some compromise to be made.
Sure.
and I agree and disagree, right? Because I think, like you said, I think there's certain rules that you need to follow and that need to be passed down, because otherwise, if you don't have that structure, everything just falls apart. But if it's too stiff and you don't allow for that adaptability, like with the royals,
There'll be rebellion.
right? And some people do move away. I mean, we've seen it with the British royal family. So I think that's a perfect example that you gave. So certain rules need to be followed, but you still need to give them that leeway to grow and become themselves within that structure. So it's a constant trying to find a balance, and staying up to date with the environment and the individual characters that are part of it.
Yes, I want to say one other thing about the Kardashians before we go on to the next lovely question. I think that the members of the Kardashian family definitely grew into their roles compared to when they
Yeah.
started 10 years ago or 15 or 20 years ago. I remember when Kim Kardashian first started and she was on the side of a bus in Los Angeles advertising her latest product as a model and working 360 days out of the week because Kris Jenner was just booking her, and she was the pioneer. And yet they have grown into that. And I do want to, and I don't know where Kris Jenner learned her sense of governance from, because I think her story was a bit of heartbreak in terms of that she was a flight attendant. She did not get the opportunities, and therefore she created the opportunities for her children, especially her daughters. And I want to bring up one example before we move on from Switzerland, Caesar Ritz. Do you know who Caesar Ritz is?
Yeah, from the hotels, right?
Yes, yes. And yet he did not have an opportunity to pass it on. Well, I think that there is maybe a foundation or something, but I think later on the last decade of his life, he got sick, but there was not a structure in place. And he was so busy working I think he had something like 5 different locations when he was at the height of his career, that he did not spend the time to design something outside of his work. And he was he was a self-made entrepreneur. And so again, I don't know where Kris Jenner had the mentoring from. And then I look at somebody like Caesar Ritz, who only went so far and was not able to develop his legacy further.
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak for Kris Jenner. Maybe one day you'll get her on the podcast, or
Yes.
I'll get it down for coffee. But I think obviously she has a lot of children and now grandchildren. So, but she sees the family, and I think always has it as a business. And I think that's also really key. But then, because you said Ritz, he was so focused on work and not on planning anything else, which is work, work, work. Whereas with the Kardashians, from what we can see on the show nowadays, obviously I don't know how it is, but she puts a lot of focus also on family retreats, right? They always go on family vacation.
Their emotional wellness.
Exactly, that the families get together, just the daughters get together with the grandchildren once, so that everyone has that time off, even if it's just for a long weekend in Malibu or the Caribbeans or whatever. But she makes sure that balance is there, and to use it and then go back to really, business. And I think she pretty much has a really perfect from the outside routine down. So yeah.
Okay. Well, as a transition to the next question, I will lean into the example of Kris Jenner. I have heard that she did collaborate with Ryan Seacrest, and he collaborated with one of the top advisory firms in the United States known as Bain and Capital. So this brings me to my next question about advisors. One of the things that is a trend these days is some of the NextGen family members are choosing different advisors. And I wondered, what do you think is behind that? What do you think are current advisors missing? What do you think is the value that some of the new advisors are bringing to the table? Would you like to start us off, Riccardo?
Yes, thank you, Angelina. An advisor or relationship manager are really broad terms, right? Most often people refer to wealth managers when speaking about relationship managers. When they talk about advisors, most people think about tax and legal advisors. So it's really a professional who is responsible for overseeing and managing financial affairs and relationships of high net worth, ultra net worth individuals and families. The issue with this term and the broadness of its use is that some are working at a financial institution and only know the families they serve very little and advise only on their offering and services. Though traditionally speaking, how it should be, the role of a relationship manager goes beyond traditional financial planning and investment management. It's like in other professions, and these complex families with complex wealth structures, you need a whole lot of advisors. It's like in the medical world, right? There's not the one medical doctor that can solve all your problems. There's so many specialized MDs for all kinds of issues. So you start with a general practitioner, and then you need, for all kinds of different issues, you need a specialist. That's really similar. And what it should really encompass is a holistic approach to wealth management, estate planning, and family governance. And that's also what we do, without being the expert in every of those disciplines, but really understanding the whole picture, like a general practitioner, your family doctor, who really knows the whole picture and then identifies the gap and introduces you, refers you to the needed specialist, right? And relationship managers and advisors can help regarding present and future conflicts. They can act as a mediator. They can facilitate open and constructive communications, provide objective professional guidance to help the family navigate complex financial decisions or family governance questions, structuring succession questions. They can help the family, especially the next gens, as we said before, in education, about financial matters, about philanthropy, about managing family wealth.
Yeah, I agree, Ricardo. In thinking why the next gen often seeks new advisors, because I think that's something that you asked as well. I think most likely because more often than not, they do not receive what Ricardo just mentioned. So they do not include the next gen, or sometimes worse, they treat them, you're the child of, and not necessarily the future client. So I think meeting them, the next gen, really on an eye level is extremely important. Sometimes you also have older advisors that may not meet the interests of the younger generation, or certain topics that the younger generation has, such as crypto or fintech. And so they lose their interest. And there may, of course, be different reasons. Not all of them have to be negative. So the next gen may seek out new advisors to get new perspectives, to see a more innovative approach on investments, or even to diversify. Like Ricardo said, not to have one expert, but certain ones to diversify their knowledge and see what's out there. Generally, though, if you want to keep the next gen interested, I think you need to be able to show them that you, as the advisors, are able to adapt to the ever-changing economic landscapes, to leverage digital tools and platforms, that you are flexible in their processes, that you're open for new ideas. And most importantly, as Ricardo had mentioned, is that relationship managers should really include the next generation in the talks that they have with the family, in meetings, show them opportunities in the investment world, help them communicate their vision with the rest of the family. So
Yes. Yes. And I would just add to that. I think sometimes the next gen coming up, the rising gen, if there's that transition, especially if they know the transition's coming up regarding inheritance, I think like you'd both kind of hinted towards is maybe they just want to be seen, heard, and understood, to be listened to, not to be written off as like the child of. Yeah,
yeah,
maybe
no,
that.
I think that's an issue, and meeting them at eye level is, I think,
And
is
listening
very.
to them, like genuinely listening.
And I think you asked also, why, or I guess it's the question, why certain advisors are maybe afraid to touch certain subjects, because a lot of these advisors, where sometimes we ask, or we think, why don't they ask these questions? Why don't they talk to the family about certain subjects? Perhaps I think many are reluctant to touch and discuss the sensitive topics. For one, maybe they don't feel educated enough on this, which I think is fine. But I think it's important to touch on it and then say, look, I'm not an expert on it, but I have someone that is an expert.
And to create some breathing room.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or some people are just worried of starting a conflict discussion that then falls back on them, because if you do open the volcano erupts and it all goes back on the advisor because he asked a question that he shouldn't have asked.
That's Pandora's box.
Yeah, it can happen too. So I think that's another reason probably why some don't touch certain subjects that they should. Yeah, I don't know, Ricardo, if you agree.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's all again is communication, trust, having a close and good relationship. Sometimes, next gens just don't ask because they don't want to ask. They think stupid questions, or the older ones are so busy, as you said, Angelina, before. So, like some examples, they're so busy that they're never available to have a quality discussion. There's so many reasons why those things don't happen, and then obviously the next gens, then they just, if they're really hungry for knowledge and answers, then they just try to find somewhere else the answers to the questions they have. That's normal.
Hey, yes. Yes, I can't imagine if an advisor leaned across the table and said to the next gen, so what is it like to continually fail the expectations of your parents? It'd be like super awkward, but maybe that's the pink elephant in the room. And the next gen family member is just dying to like have somebody ask them that because they're walking around in a world of loneliness. Any closing thoughts, whether it's about private placement life insurance on the business side or any other, maybe on the topic of how governance can help in stewarding wealth for the long-term legacy? Any final thoughts?
Yes. As you mentioned before, we really come from the life insurance space, private placement life insurance space. One of the fundamental elements, realities of life is when you deal with health, life insurance, is you talk about health, you talk about life expectation, you talk about, you have to, because it's part of the contracts, what happens next, at least to this contract and to the value the contract carries. And that's a bit for this life insurance business is a natural element. But we often see that still with the families we talk to, sometimes difficult financial needs, planning needs arise while you want to add such a private placement life insurance to generate liquidity in an estate, for example, because they're out of probate. Even though if you have, usually they're held in trust, it's out of probate anyway, but quite often you want to have quick liquidity, or you want to, for example, on estate equalization, you want to dispose maybe of business interest to some part of the family and compensate that with just cash to maybe another part, other beneficiary. There are all kinds of reasons. But then you have to talk about these succession questions and what happens later. And we see often that other advisors, especially from the investment world, and even many other disciplines, don't want to talk about that. It's an uncomfortable topic in general for many people. But one thing is fact, that the life definitely ends with death. What we don't know is when. And we all hope for a long and healthy life. But when you have responsibility for a family, for a business, for wealth, then obviously it's very important to think about what happens if I'm hit by the bus, or whether
And planning.
my Learjet is hitting a mountain or whatever, something that happens prematurely. And this is a discussion we often trigger with this insurance planning that comes typically from a financial needs side, and then engaging in the really wider topic about the whole legacy, the structuring, the family. So it's really an entry point into this subject, because it has to be addressed, and many avoid that topic. But
well, it should be addressed compared to avoided. Yes.
Yeah. And it generally should be addressed, as I mentioned, when there's responsibility and somebody cares about what happens to the loved ones, then you have to think about. But as you said before, a lot of people are very busy to be successful, that they don't step back and take time to reflect. And these are one of these topics to think about.
Well, they're chasing it unless there's some catalyst. Like with taxes, it's the IRS. So with legacy, it needs to be an advisor or depth of character or something that has that personal agency chime in. Any final thoughts, Laura?
So on the PPLI, or private placement life insurance, if you ask me, I think obviously it's an amazing product, but it's only a solution for a certain number of people. And I think that's extremely important to state. But the same thing goes for family governance, right? So I think most often than not, most families do need some type of insurance. That may be PPLI, life
Private
insurance.
placement life insurance.
Correct. It may just be term insurance, but insurance is usually part of it. And the same goes for family governance. I think very often you need some form of it, whether you need the family constitution from the very beginning, maybe not. Does every family need their own family office? Probably not. But what every family does need most often is some type of, mechanisms put in place about how to communicate, about how to educate the next generation. It's certain foundations. And I think the importance really is looking at it, like we said a couple of times, really about the holistic view, seeing it as different puzzle pieces, seeing how they fit together, just providing one solution is usually not the answer. It's usually having a portfolio of solutions available to a client, working with them, and then really tailoring whatever that is, the mechanisms to the needs of the client. And I think that's the same in private placement life insurance as it is in family governance and in a lot of other subject areas out there.
Yeah, I think the point is really with that particular product. I mean, at the end, it's a financial planning tool, but the uniqueness of that is compared to all other financial investments, financial advisors, that with that, you can really facilitate the really wide discussion. And I mean, we see, of course, other disciplines like estate planning attorneys. Obviously, they also handle and deal with that subject. But again, they focus very much on the technical aspect about creating a trust, about wills and all these things. And we want to ensure, and we ask all advisors really to take this holistic approach and don't be afraid to address these kind of topics with families, to start this discussion, that at the end the client not only gets a technical solution or great tax efficient solution, but really questions whether this is really embedded properly within the family, cross generation, how it serves the legacy planning, whether it will add to increase the harmony with the family, or whether it will increase the likelihood of in the worst case, litigation in the next generation because things haven't been thought through and the family component is got lost in all this technical structuring. So
yeah, I think by really consciously integrating family governance structures and the mechanisms, by promoting the education, the communication, like Riccardo said, fostering the stewardship mentality that he mentioned prior. Families really can ensure that their wealth and that the family values are sustained over generations. But it does mean, and it does require ongoing dedication, commitment from everyone, and reassessment, periodically. So I think that's to wrap it up.
Lovely, lovely. Well, thank you to both of you for your time. It's evening time over across the pond in Switzerland, and speaking about all of the moving pieces of governance, starting with the definition at the beginning of our episode today, to also all of what make the mechanisms and the policies work, whether it's the councils or the Constitution or the meetings on a weekly basis, to just the courage to have the conversations to build the communication and trust. So thank you so much. I'm going to read out my closing paragraph real quick. Okay, so in closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder to Legacy Planning, a boutique firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy. And I hope to continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education or preparation in the moot or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself in new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your emotional as well as intellectual curiosity. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're tuning in on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SoundCloud, please remember to rate and review and share. If you're watching us on YouTube, please remember to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. So thank you so much for joining us once again this week. And thank you to Riccardo and Laura for speaking into the subject of legacy once again.
Thank you, Angelina, for having us.
Angelina.